And we're continuing with the 11th and final chapter of the Wolves of Willoughby Chase. It's all coming together now to arrest Miss Slycarp. The two constables, Spock and Cardigan, are hiding in the walls with Mr. Gripe, the lawyer. Sylvia and Bonnie are pretending that they've come back and fake dirtied themselves up, and they've been called up to what is now the schoolroom to meet with Miss Slycarp. Even though they knew they had good friends close at hand, the children could not control a certain swelled and breathless feeling in the region of their midriffs as they approached the schoolroom door. James tapped at the door in response to Miss Slycarp's "Come in," opened it, and stood aside to let the children through. A quick glance showed that all the furniture had been removed and that the room was filled with desks. The more senior children from Miss Briskett's school were sitting at them, with expressions varying from nervous excitement to petrification on their faces. Miss Slycarp stood on a raised platform by a blackboard. She had a long wooden pointer in her hand. Miss Briskett was there, too, sitting at the instructress's desk. She wore a stern and forbidding expression, but on Miss Slycarp's face there was a look of triumph. "So," she said, a long hissing exultation. "So, you have returned. Come here." They advanced slowly and trembling until they stood before the platform. Miss Slycarp was so tall that they almost had to lean back to look up at her. "Please take us back into your school, Miss Slycarp," faltered Bonnie. "We're so cold and tired and hungry." Into Sylvia's mind came a sudden recollection of the grouse pies and apricots they'd eaten on the train. She bit her lip and tried to look sorrowful. Behind them, James quietly poked the fire, but no one noticed him. All eyes were still on the returning truants. "Hungry?" said Miss Slycarp. "You'll be hungrier still before I have done with you. Do you think you can run away, spend 2 months idling and playing on the moors, return when it suits you, and then expect to be given roast beef and pudding? You'll have no food for 3 days. Perhaps that will teach you something, and you shall both be beaten, and we'll see what a taste of the dungeons will do for your spirit. James, go and get the dungeon keys." "No, miss," said James firmly. "I obey some of your orders, because I've got no alternative, but help to put the children in those dungeons I can't and won't. It's not Christian." And he left the room, shutting the door sharply behind him. I'll get the keys, Letitia," said Miss Briskett, rising ponderously. "You can be administering chastisement meanwhile." Miss Slycarp came down from her platform. "Miss Green," she said, and her eyes were so glittering with fury that even Bonnie quailed. "Put out your hand." Bonnie took a step backwards. Miss Slycarp followed her and raised the pointer menacingly. The children at the desks drew a tremendous breath. But just as the pointer came swishing down, the chimney-piece panel flew open, and Mr. Gripe, stepping out, seized hold of Miss Slycarp's arm. For a moment she was utterly dumbfounded. Then in wrath she exclaimed, "Who are you, sir? Let me go at once. What are you doing in my house?" "In your house, ma'am? In your house? Don't you remember me, Miss Slycarp?" said Mr. Gripe. "I was the attorney instructed by your distant relative, Sir Willoughby Green, to seek you out and offer you the position of instructress to your daughter. To his daughter, you brought with you a testimonial from the Duchess of Kensington. Don't you remember?" Miss Slycarp turned pale. "And who gave you permission, woman?" suddenly thundered Mr. Gripe, "to turn this house into a boarding school? Who said you could use these children with villainous cruelty, beat them, starve them, and lock them in dungeons? Oh, it's of no use to protest. I've been behind that panel and heard every word you've uttered." "It was only a joke," faltered Miss Slycarp. "I had no intention of really shutting them in the dungeons." At this moment, Mrs. Briskett re-entered the room, holding a bunch of enormous rusty keys. We can't use the upper dungeons, Letitia," she began briskly, "for Lucy and Emma are occupying them. I have brought the lower." Then she saw Mr. Gripe behind him, and behind him the 2 Bow Street officers. Her jaw dropped, and she was stricken to silence. "Only a joke indeed," said Mr. Gripe harshly. "Mr. Cardigan, please, place these 2 females under arrest, if you please. Until it is convenient to remove them to jail, you may as well avail yourself of the dungeon keys so obligingly put at your disposal." "You can't do this! You've no right!" shrieked the enraged Miss Slycarp, struggling in the grip of Cardigan. "I have papers signed by Sir Willoughby, empowering me to do as I please with this property in the event of his death, and appointing me guardian of the children." "Papers signed by Sir Willoughby? Pish!" said Mr. Gripe scornfully. "You may as well know, ma'am, that your accomplice, Mr. Grimshaw, who is already in prison, has confessed to the whole plot." At this news, all the fight went out of Mrs. Brisket, and she allowed herself to be manacled by Spock, only murmuring, "Grimshaw's a fool, a paltry whining fool," but Miss Slycarp still gave battle. "I tell you," she shouted, "I saw Sir Willoughby before he departed, and he himself left me full power." At this moment, a hazy tread resounded along the passage, and they heard a voice exclaiming, What the devil is all this? Desks, blackboards, carpet taken up. Has my house been turned into reformatory?" The door burst open, and in marched Sir Willoughby Green. Behind him stood James, grinning for joy. Bonnie turned absolutely pale with incredulity, stood so still for a moment, motionless and wide-eyed, then uttering one cry, "Papa!" she flung herself into her father's arms. "Well, Minx, have you missed us, eh? Have you been a good girl and minded your book?" "I can see you haven't," he said, surveying her lovingly. "Rosy as a pippin and brown as a berry. I can see you've been out of doors all day long instead of sewing your sampler and learning your je ne sais quoi. And Sylvia, too. Eh, my word, what a change from the little mouse we left here. Well, 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 girls will be girls. But what's all this, ma'am?" he continued, addressing Miss Slycarp threateningly. "What's all this hugger-mugger? I never gave you permission to turn Willoughby Chase into a school. No, dame, I didn't. Being my fourth cousin doesn't give you such rights as that." "But, sir," interjected Mr. Gripe, who at first, silent with amazement, had now got his breath back. "Sir Willoughby! This is joyful indeed. We had all supposed you drowned when the Thessaly sank." Sir Willoughby burst into a fit of laughter. "Ah, so they told me at your office. We have been travelling close behind you, Mr. Gripe. I visited your place of business yesterday, and learned you had just departed for Willoughby. And since Lady Green was anxious to get back as soon as may be and relieve the children's anxiety, we hired a special train and came post-haste after you." "But were you not in the shipwreck then, Sir Willoughby?" The reply to this question was lost in Bonnie's rapturous cry, "Is Mamma here too? Is she?" "Why, yes, miss, and etting to see you, I'll be bound." Before the words had left his mouth, Bonnie was out of the door. Sylvia, from a nice sense of delicacy, had not followed her cousin. She thought that Bonnie and her mother should be allowed those first few blissful moments of reunion alone together. Sir Willoughby and Mr. Gripe had retired to a corner of the schoolroom, and Mr. Gripe was talking hard while Sir Willoughby listened with his blue eyes bulging, occasionally exclaiming, "Why, dame, for sheer cool, calm, impertinent effrontery! Why, bless my soul!" Once he wheeled round to his niece and said, "Is it really true, Sylvia? Did Miss Slycarp do these things?" "Yes, sir, indeed she did," said Sylvia. "Then hanging's too good for you, ma'am," he growled at Miss Slycarp. "Have her taken to the dungeons, Gripe. When these two excellent fellows have breakfast, they can take her and the other harpy off to prison." "Oh, sir," said Sylvia. "Yes, well, Miss Puss?" "May I go with them to the dungeons, sir? I believe there are 2 children who have been put down there by Miss Slycarp, and they will be so cold and unhappy and frightened." "Ah, there, by Joshua, we'll all go," said Sir Willoughby. Sylvia had never visited the dungeons at Willoughby Chase. They were a dismal and frightening quarter, never entered by the present owner and his family, though in days gone by they had been extensively employed by ancestors of Sir Willoughby. Down dark, dank, weed-encrusted steps they trod, and along narrow, rock-hewn passages, where the only sound, beside the echo of their own footfalls, was the drip of water. Sylvia shuddered when she remembered Miss Slycarp's expressed intention of imprisoning herself and Bonnie down here. "Oh, let us do hasten," she implored. "Poor Lucy and Emma must be nearly frozen with cold and fear." "Upon my soul," muttered Mr. Gripe, "this passes everything. Fancy putting children in a place like this!" Miss Slycarp and Miss Brisket trod along the rear of their captors, silent and sullen, looking neither to right nor left. The plight of Lucy and Emma was not quite so bad as it might have been. This was owing to the kind-hearted James, who, though he could not release them, had contrived to pass through their bars a number of warm blankets, and a quantity of kindling and some tapers, to enable them to light a fire, and he had also kept them supplied with food out of his own meager rations. But they were cold and miserable enough, and their astonishment and joy at the sight of Sylvia was touching to behold. Sylvia danced up and down outside the bars with impatience, while James found the right key, and then she hurried them off upstairs without waiting to see Miss Slycarp locked in their place. "Come quickly, and get warm by a fire. Patten should make you a posset, or... No, I forgot. Patten is probably not here yet, but I think I know how it is done." However, they had no more than reached the great hall when they were greeted with an ecstatic cry from Bonnie. "Sylvia, Emma, Lucy, come and see Mamma. Oh, she's so different, so much better." They went rather shyly into the salon, where Pattern, who had been summoned by Simon at full gallop on one of the coach horses, bustled about in joyful tears and served everybody with cups of frothing hot chocolate. "Well," a gay voice exclaimed, "where's my second daughter?" And in swept someone whom Sylvia would hardly have recognized for the frail, languid Lady Green. So blooming, beautiful, and bright-eyed did she appear. She embraced Sylvia cordially, made welcome the two poor prisoners, and declared, "Now I want to hear all your story, every word from the very beginning. I am proud of you both, and as for that Miss Slycarp, cousin of your father's, though she be, I hope she is sent to Botany Bay." "But Aunt Sophie," said Sylvia, "your tale must be so much more adventurous than ours. Were you not shipwrecked?" "Yes, indeed we were," said Lady Green, laughing, "and your uncle and I spent 6 very tedious days drifting in a rowing boat, our only fare being a monotonous choice of grapes or oranges, of which there happened to be a large crate in the dinghy, fortunately for us. We were then picked up by a small and most instationary fishing boat, manned by a set of fellows as picturesque as they were unwashed, whom none of them spoke a word of English. They would carry us nowhere but their home port, which turned out to be the Canary Islands. On this boat we received nothing to eat but sardines and olive oil. I am surprised these shocks and privations did not carry me off, but Sir Willoughby maintains that they were saving for me, for from the time of the wreck my health began to pick up. On reaching the Canaries, we determined to come home by the next mail ship, but they only visit these islands every 3 months or so, and one had just left. We had to wait a weary time, but the peace and sunshine during our enforced stay completed my cure, as you see." "Oh, how glad I am that you came home and didn't go on round the world," cried Bonnie. Sir Willoughby marched in beaming. Well, he said, "has Madam Hen found her chicks, eh? But as for the state of your house, my lady, I hardly dare describe it to you. We shall have it completely redecorated, and what's to be done with all these poor orphans?" "Oh, Papa," said Bonnie, bursting with excitement, "I have a plan for them." "You have you, hussy? What is it, then?" "Do you think Aunt Jane could come and live in the Dower House just across the park and run a school for them? Aunt Jane loves children." "What, Aunt Jane run a school at her age?" "Aunt Jane is very independent," Bonnie said. "She wouldn't want to feel she's living on charity, but she could have people help her, kind people, and she could teach the girls beautiful embroidery." Lucy and Emma looked so wistful at the thought of this bliss that Sir Willoughby promised to consider it. A happy party sat down to dine in the great hall that night. Spock and Cardigan, the Bow Street officials, had already left to commit their prisoners to the nearest jail, and the ruffianly gang of servants kept on by Miss Slycarp had been summarily dismissed. Simon, riding about the countryside, had taken the news of Sir Willoughby's return to all the old servants, Solly and Timon, and John Groom and Mrs. Shabunkin, and they all came hastening back, and there we will pause.